I'm going to just quietly clap so it's easier for us.
So you
for
can
me
catch
later.
the recordings.
And now they'll line up.
Yay, so we're back up.
Yeah, so it'll sound a little more three-dimensional.
Very cool.
So,
Before we officially start, do you have any questions for us about what we're gonna do?
Yeah, can you tell me about like what's the name of your podcast, like where it can be found, like what it is, and like maybe a little about yourselves, because I kind of know about you guys, but I also don't really. So.
Yeah, totally. So it's called the Boston Art Podcast. Very direct. We interview like artists, creatives, people that work in the museum field, curators, just basically whoever will chat with us. And we do sort of like long format interviews that are just kind of like a conversation without prepared questions. So basically just going to talk about art.
Yeah, it started off as a way like, it started in 2021 when the pandemic was still, keeping people away from each other and everything was very remote and distant. And I think that we really just wanted to have an avenue for ourselves to connect with artists again, because for me and Theo both, we connected with other artists through art shows or music shows or something. And at the time the show, was started, that was not a part of the landscape at all.
Yeah.
So we started connecting with people just through, having a talk on the phone or something. And it's like started off very, very weird. And like, we were having a lot of fun, but we were having so many like kind of like awkward or difficult interviews because they're so hard to do when you don't know how to do it for us. Cause we didn't know how to really interview people at all. Yeah. And we were very tight and very scared. And it's like, but the thing is, well, we were in the beginning. It was literally scary in the beginning. But what it's turned into is an effort to try to create just like not like, at first it was, okay, let's document the Boston art community.
Yeah.
But that is such a massive, multi-dimensional thing with so many different faces and so many different layers and so much different history that is, so our goal right now is to just paint a holistic picture as it is right now. Yeah. We don't feel like we are like we jokingly say we're the premier art podcast of Boston, but that, I don't know.
That's not true,
I'm sure someone could just start another one and we wouldn't be anymore. But yeah, and obviously, Theo, you're an artist and an arts professional, and I am an artist, and I don't work in the arts in an official capacity like in a museum or gallery, but just a working artist, and I have a day job that pays for me to live when art isn't paying for me to live.
Yeah.
Same,
so
honestly.
It isn't right. Yeah, right. Exactly. But
totally.
Yeah, we've been doing it for about 3.5 years now. So a lot of recordings.
Yeah.
Right. I think this would probably be episode.
Oh God.
If it's not 150, it might be 149.
Oh wow.
This current one right now.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah. So
okay.
Significant milestone.
Yeah, you guys made it much further than I did when I tried to start a podcast.
Oh, really?
Did you do that? I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, back during like COVID when it first hit, I had these like few friends who were all into like American politics with me, and like we were just like students in college, and we were like, let's start a politics like podcast, because we were like, oh, it'll be good to do this like going into the 2020 election, not knowing anything about what was going to happen. But we only did like 2 episodes. It was also definitely like a weird mix of people, because it was like me who like I felt very much so on like the radical ends of things, and then it was a kid who was like very much so like a liberal, I'd say, more than like an Obama liberal. Like he had a giant Obama poster on his wall, which was like sort of endearing as like a kid
behind him in the Zoom meeting.
Yeah,
Okay,
totally. And like I was sort of endeared by it because I was like I was the generation who grew up with like Obama as like one of my biggest inspirations as like a young black kid growing up. But also then we have like a third kid, John, who is like a staunch libertarian who like
I love the name drop too.
It's Jonas, John, and Carl. I don't think the names really matter that much, but and I don't think that like John and I also like we sort of had become friends because we were taking this like Russian history class.
Oh, cool.
It was like the Russian 20th century.
Yeah.
And so we got into like conversations about like communism and like American values and like all this stuff that we cared about. And it was super fun for the 2 episodes we did, but we just, never moved very far with it, you know. It was a lot of work. And so like I really respect y'all for putting in this effort for 149 episodes you said. That's crazy.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, it helps that we live together too.
Yeah, that's a good
we
point.
have to do this.
Yeah, we were on the other sides of the country. Yeah,
that's wild. That's
it was
crazy.
like it was literally like Massachusetts, California, and Kentucky, or Kansas.
Did you do it over Zoom or something?
Yeah. Zoom.
Oh, that's crazy.
Nice. Yeah.
Truly 2020 core.
Very much so. Yeah.
And did you grow up in the area?
A little bit. Yeah, like I was born in like Connecticut. I lived in I'm a New Englander at heart apparently. Right. I always forget that. But I left the state when I was like 4 and ended up in like Pennsylvania for a while, Arizona for a little bit. And I moved to Massachusetts in 2015, right before high school. And I went to high school here. I went to high school on the South Shore at Milton High for a year, and on the North Shore for 3 years at the Pingree School. And then I went off to Bowdoin. So I then went up to Maine and have been in New England since then. So
Did your parents like travel for work or something like that?
My dad was a teacher, yeah.
Oh, cool.
So I think it was just like a tough job market when I was a kid with everything that was going on. He had been like an engineer, and with things that were changing with the state of the government, he had worked for like the federal government for a little bit, for the like USPS or whatever. So things were just kind of weird with that, and he turned to teaching because he thought it'd be a good way to like give me and my siblings good educations.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think he realized, he was like, wow, like there's no way my kids are going to be able to like afford college unless they go to like a top tier college that can pay them via student like financial aid,
like scholarships and stuff.
Yeah, so like I got out of college with a lot like much lower student loans than most of my friends who went to other schools. So it was very much a gift that my dad like spent the time to teach at schools that helped me to get into a college like that, you know.
That's awesome.
Interesting. Yeah. So he was teaching at like high schools or middle schools, or he was
high
teaching
schools. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He taught at like boarding schools and like private schools and stuff like that. I mean, like our family's like low income by pretty much for all that time for like any metric. But he was like, yeah, no, it'd be a good opportunity for my kids to get to experience like a different culture and a different group of people, and also to have like an education that really fostered their intellect. And I felt that way very much so. Like I knew the difference between my public school education and my private school education really wasn't a matter of like what was taught book-wise, but more so how it was taught and like when certain things were emphasized. And I mean, I think I came out of high school with a much bigger head than I went in with. So I think that's like both a good and a bad thing, you know?
It's the perfect mentality to go into art school.
Right? Yeah.
Self-exploration.
Gosh. And see, I went in as a gov major, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I finished as a gov major too, but I also did visual arts, so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's a nice balance. Very different focuses.
Yeah.
You know, I definitely didn't go to switch schools as much as you did probably, but I switched schools 3 or 4 times through high school, and I remember it was really like hugely like, you know, rattling, you know, but I feel like I also came out of it way more socially, like I had so much more ability to be social. I feel like because of that, because like I feel like it forced me to reestablish my group over and over again.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean? Because you seem like a really outgoing person too.
I feel like I've always been a little bit. I've been the person who can talk to anybody most of my life. Is kind of how my parents saw it. Whether or not people talk back to me is a different question. But
gotcha.
Yeah, my grandma likes to joke. She says, what is it? Whoever taught Carl how to talk, I got to get a hold of them and just wring their necks because he started talking and never stopped.
Wow. Do you have a big family?
I wouldn't say like really big. It's like me and my 2 siblings and then my parents. So yeah.
Where are you in the siblings? Are you the oldest?
I'm the youngest.
You're the youngest?
Yeah,
Oh, that's funny.
I'm the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like it's nice being the baby. Like it gives me some privileges, but I think that those privileges need to come with recognition of what my sister did not have as the oldest sister, you know?
Oh, you need to talk to my siblings.
Theo's
Oh
an
my
oldest.
god.
I mean,
Yeah,
An
I'm
elder
oldest.
child.
the beef between like oldest sisters and like youngest brothers is not a beef that like is real. It's like only because of the way that they were treated and not
Yeah.
because of how they treat each other. Because like I get along with my sister like nobody's business, but
That's true.
also it's like, yeah, no, she was like, there were restrictions on her that were definitely not on me.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, when my youngest sibling would like, we'd all be in trouble or something, and then he'd like, this was probably when he was like under 5, so I shouldn't really talk shit, but it's still funny. He would go and like hug my mom, and she'd be like, "Oh, I know you didn't do anything wrong." And he'd like make faces at me over her shoulder. I'm like, I hate you. But he's like my best friend now. So.
That's awesome.
Both my brothers are. But yeah, that's real.
Yeah.
It's very real.
Gosh.
Oh, man. So what? So talking about the timeline, like in college, what drew you to government?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I really got into, I guess it's hard. Like, I've been really for a long time trying to figure out when I got into politics and government. I mean, I think my earliest memory of, like, sort of recognition of the political world in America was probably in, like, 2003 or 4 when I was, like, a child, like, very small, in my mom's, like, my mom's dad's bedroom at like, my grandparents' house. His name was Carl also.
Oh.
So, like, it was in his bedroom, like, lying on his bed with my mom, and she was, like, telling me about the presidents, and I asked who the president was, and she was like, "It's George Bush, but you could be president, too." And here I was not thinking much of it or what that
Yeah.
even meant. And then, lo and behold, a few years later, she's, like, supporting the campaign for Barack Obama there in Pottstown, where we were living at the time. And it became very real very quickly that, like, oh, wow, there's this whole sort of story of my family's history that I haven't been told that, like, clearly is sort of implicated by the election of this black man to the presidency. And now I need to, like, figure out what this meant. And, like, I remember being in, like, the 2nd grade and having our teachers sort of, like, talk about the idea that, like, we all come from different places in the world. Like, most of us are not from here. And looking at the textbooks that were given me, and really only identifying with, like, the Native Americans because there was nobody else in the books that looked like me.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, I had this recognition of, like, sort of, like, identity and race that came relatively early. And, like, there were other little moments that sort of, like, cemented what my understanding of race was at a young age. But when I was in, like, the 4th grade and started learning about, like, the Holocaust and the Civil War, like, all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is why all these years I haven't been told this history, because this history is just, like, too brutal and horrible for you to be able to tell children.
Yeah.
And so you wait these years until you can tell us. So, like, I think that when I recognized that, it made me feel much more interested in learning what are the parts of this history and the story that aren't being told to me. And then I, like, got into high school and took a class called American Cultural Studies, which coincidentally actually brought me to the Museum of Fine Arts one day.
Oh, wow.
Way back when. And I fell in love with that class, and I fell in love with, like, this sort of discussion of American culture and literature and politics, partly because I was fascinated by the way in which, like, we do live in this sort of, like, amalgamation of a lot of different American like American stories. It's people who came here last year, people who came here 20 years ago, people who came here 30 years ago, or 100 years ago. And, like, in my case, I learned about my ancestors and my dad through my dad's, like, genealogy, and he found out that we have ancestors that date back to, like, before the United States was even a country.
Oh, wow.
Like Black Americans who fought in the American Revolution on both sides, Native Americans, that we don't really know the names of, but we know are somewhere in there. And so, like, it was a little bit of us, like, me recognizing, like, wow, for some reason, though I'm a black man living in this country, though my family's been here for generations, because I'm black, I'm somehow less of an American in some people's eyes. And I think that, like, that feels like an important fight to fight. It's like the hill to die on. It doesn't seem like it, but it's only important because I feel like there's a lot of people who don't have anyone to fight for them in that kind of conversation. And I guess, like, sometimes it feels like there's other more important things in politics to be talking about. Like we could be talking about election rights or like voter rights. We could be talking about clean energy and finding ways to invest in that. And I think that there's like a lot of different ways of looking at politics and like ways that politics embodies itself. But for me, it felt like this kind of a conversation about like political dialogue and discourse, conversations about history and the meaning of it, like felt intrinsically important to me. Since then I've had this like experience of learning about like Du Bois and Washington and like this sort of like battle between ideals of like what's more important, to have Black people seen as full humans in this very esoteric sort of philosophical way, or to have us have like a place in this country that's economically based that like keeps us from being just gotten rid of or destroyed or killed. And I think that the like reaction that I have to both of those is that like neither of them is simply the answer, but rather what's important is to recognize that like we as American people, but like we as human beings can create a lot of beautiful things if we put our minds towards creating beautiful things. But things that are built out of like hate and pain and suffering, I don't think are worth our energy. So I guess like now it feels like my efforts in politics are a little bit to just keep people talking and keep people having the important conversations. Because like when I lived in Arizona, I was like the one like liberal-minded, like progressive-minded kid amongst a sea of conservatives, it often felt. So I remember very often being in classrooms and having it be like me versus everybody else in class. On like any given issue. And like at that point in time, I had like internalized homophobia and I had like internalized racism and sexism to like deal with on my own side. So I wasn't really the most effective advocate for many of those issues. But I also recognize like, wow, like why is it that all these other kids just accept these like mindsets that are like diminishing towards like large swaths of people? I don't understand that. And so I don't know, since then it felt like I have one big gift that was given to me by like whatever creator exists in there, and I believe in God. Like I think that the gift that I was given is the ability to like talk and discuss things with people and to like communicate and have conversations. And so it feels like I need to be using that for something. And so I wonder, is it like academia? Is it learning? Is it like going into the arts? Like sometimes I wonder if I could be a curator, but right now it's art. Like, I don't know, art feels like a meaningful path for me, you know, and a way to use my language and my like desire to speak towards making something pretty, you know?
Yeah, and I think like one of the most important things for every one of those directions you mentioned is storytelling. You know, and to have that ability to speak, or gift of gab as some people call it, maybe that means something different, I don't know, but like you know, just storytelling and understanding history and stuff is like so beautiful, because obviously there's tons of curators and artists and people that have affected change that maybe they weren't celebrated for their communications and storytelling. I don't know, but like still I think like, because I identify with that, like I feel like one of my strong suits that I didn't know was a strong suit is also talking. Like I didn't even know that that's something that you could like resume into a skill or something.
Totally.
So like, yeah, I don't know, I mean, how do you feel like that kind of like, because something I've also struggled with in my life is trying to kind of fuse interests, you know what I mean? Like communication and storytelling with my art or with music. Have you found like any interesting ways to kind of like intertwine those?
Yeah, that's actually, so about this time last year, I was doing a fellowship with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress that was like hosted kind of partially. It was like I was part of it as a fellow coming from Bowdoin College that year. And I had written this like stupid paper that I'm not honestly all that proud of today, about like election history in Maine, which is like a fun story, but I just didn't tell it that well. But like about this time last year, I was actually at the conference that was planned throughout the whole year for this event. And we had this like one night where we went and we were speaking. It was really a networking event where we got to meet different people who were involved in the organization. And I was sort of explaining, you know, I was giving my elevator pitch. I was saying that, you know, I have this deep love for art and I have a deep love for politics and history, and I would love to find a way to like really marry these things together, though I'm not exactly sure what that is right now. And I think it's sort of funny being here working at the museum now, because this first job feels like a bit of a combination of these things, where it's a little bit of storytelling through, like, I think like a lot of development feels a little like storytelling. It's how do you like send a message to people? How do you show them something both subtly and also verbally, expressing very clear ideas and also very subtle ideas. But also then it's like very much connected to the arts because it's an art museum too, you know? Actually, one of the things that you were kind of bringing up that really like resonated with me was this idea that like, how can the ability to speak be its own sort of career or job or passion? And it made me think of like how generationally the United States has really changed over the years. Because if you look back at like the 20th century or the 19th century in the United States, like there was, I think, this much broader sort of culture of lecture, of this idea of like orators going up on a stage and giving like a well-meaning speech that doesn't really have the same effect today. Like, yeah, politicians go and give speeches, but like I think because like you see them all the time, like how many times have we seen Biden give a speech in our lifetimes that like it does start to like lose a little bit of its like importance, and nobody's going on and like reading these speeches word for word written down. Whereas like Abraham Lincoln goes to Gettysburg and like gives his short speech and every word is being written down, maybe not as accurately as, you know, you might hope. But it gives like a certain effect to how people receive it, you know. More so than that, I was thinking of Frederick Douglass, you know, who, you know, was born into slavery but became one of the world's most renowned orators in his lifetime. And part of it is passion. Like, I think it seems so clear from his writing that it was a man who was speaking about something that mattered so deeply to him that like he couldn't let these words be held in. And sometimes I feel that way, and I know it can betray me at moments of like like why do I have these feelings in my chest that need to come out, you know?
Yeah.
But I think it means that there's something behind it, and I don't know. It feels like the spoken word is its own form of art that a lot of people don't really recognize.
Yeah.
But like I was actually talking about that with my older brother because he's a musician, and we were talking about this idea of like language and music and how there's this like marriage of these things. And so I don't exactly know. I don't exactly know like what the full combination of like my values in politics and art is, but right now it feels like and you guys should stop me from rambling because I will talk for
this.
Yeah, I can talk for an hour if you let me. Like there was a paper that I wrote at the end of last year that felt like one of the first things I had written where I was like, wow, I feel like I'm coming up with something. Like I feel like I'm reaching something that I haven't really heard anyone discuss yet or talk about. And it was a paper where I was discussing a few movies that were made by Black directors or films. I was Bamboozled by Spike Lee, which is a film about a Black television producer who makes a show that's essentially a minstrel show with a Black man wearing blackface, and of course it like has like some wild like applause from like everybody in the country who loves it. So it's like a very controversial movie. I talked about I believe it was Clayton Bigsby, one of the characters from Dave Chappelle's show. Dave Chappelle, who of course has like, you know, kind of dropped off the map in my mind, and a lot. Don't really
controversial guy.
Yeah, not really fan of any of his political discussion now. But like when he talks about Black people and Black issues, I think there's something very valuable in that.
Yeah.
And the character Clayton Bigsby is like a Black man who's been raised as a white person because he's blind, and so he has no idea that he's Black. And it's comedic, of course.
Yeah.
And then the third one was a character from the show Atlanta, made by, you know, Donald Glover, where it's Donald Glover dressed up as like sort of a white dude that's kind of a stand for Michael Jackson. And it's really weird because when you first see the show, you don't recognize that this character, I think his name was like Benny. I think it's like Benny Perkins or something like that. Like you don't realize that he's like a Black man dressed in whiteface necessarily. You're just like, this is just like a really weird looking face. But I was trying to talk about this idea that like Black directors today can use race bending, like this sort of idea of like not accepting the norm or like the reality of like what somebody might be, and like the acceptable sense of reality, I guess, racially, to kind of highlight how race is sort of stupid. Like this whole conversation about race that we have in this country is like sort of meaningless when you get to the reality, which is that like we are all one species. And like these differences that we like define by race are really differences of culture, and they're ethnic based. They're ethnically divided. They're not racially divided. But race is the dominant like sort of classification of peoples.
Right.
And I think the best way that if you want to like have this discussion about this cultural phenomena like race, the best way to do so is through, I think, looking at the art, the cultural like media, the visual culture that we create, because I think that there's like both subtle like messaging that goes through the way we paint things, the way we create things, and also by like the way that we like give value to stuff. Like I was watching a video yesterday, it was like a New York Times video about a painting that like ended, that now is at the Met. But had been at like a few other museums and in the hands of private collectors for years without them recognizing that there had been an enslaved person painted into the painting originally, that at some point was painted out of the painting. And so it wasn't for years until they actually restored this painting and brought this person back into the picture. Or like the example of George Washington and William Lee, the like famous painting of George Washington with this black horse and this like black enslaved person who was like one of his enslaved slaves. Standing there in the image, but his name wasn't on the object label for years and years. And I think that there's like a conversation to have about like, okay, first off, like why is it that the name wasn't on there?
Yeah.
You know, B, like why is it that the artist painted this the way they did? So they like paint George Washington in the sunlight and this enslaved person off to the side, you know? Then there's the question of like, is this enslaved person there as a person, or are they there as property? You know, because the enslaved person stands right next to a horse, and no one's going to look at a horse and think, oh, this is anything more than the property of this man who owns it, you know? So I think that there's like a real conversation to have about like the construction of like our visual discourse, as well as like sort of the verbal discourse as well. And I think that feels like the most clear sort of marriage of these things, because I think that like implicit in that discussion is politics. I think that there's a politics in like visual forms. And I think that too, like it helps us to understand how we can do better politics or more effective politics, sadly. And I'm not like, I don't know if that's necessarily my goal.
Yeah.
Partly because it's like politics is, in the words of I guess it's not really his quote, but like he used to say this all the time. My sophomore year, I took a Civil War class, and our professor used to always hammer in on politics is war by other means. And in a sense, war is politics by other means. It's us making that decision to not do violence and instead do arguments and compromise.
Right.
And when we can't argue and compromise to come to solutions, that's when we do war as human beings. So I think it's hard because like what it means is that if we're not willing to compromise in this sort of general sense, then we're always going to be in a sense of fighting, in a sense of violence. But I think that the other side of that is recognizing how implicit within many forms of politics is violence still. So it's not like just because we're doing politics means there's no violence being done to people. I think that there's violence being done to people every single day, especially as a product of America's history. So I think that like, I don't know, like these all feel like very much so one thing to me. And I guess it's hard for me to delineate between them all. And when I got into like political philosophy, that's where I felt like I was seeing these things all connected together. Actually, I'm reading a book right now that's about political philosophy in a sense. It's a book called How to Think Like a Woman, and it's written. I should find out who the author is so I can plug this book because I think it's really fun. Her name is Regan or Reagan. I think it's Regan. Regan Penaluna, and it's 4 women philosophers who taught me how to love the life of the mind. And I've just been like finding a lot of fun in it because it's like a sort of a discussion of, I don't know, this journey for somebody who's not being sort of encouraged to use their mind, you know? And actually kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about like schooling, I think that one of the recognitions the things that I've recognized most recently is that like I went to a middle school with a bunch of kids who, some of whom like got to go to college and many of whom didn't.
Right.
Some of them have kids now, some of them are married, some of them are off doing all sorts of things, some of them still live in Sedona, Arizona. And it felt like a place where, you know, if you went in with privilege, you might leave with privilege, but a lot of kids don't go in there without privilege and come out with anything more. And so, you know, I guess reading this book, it's like I understand a little bit of like what it feels like to be like on an island by yourself, you know, to feel like nobody's got you, like nobody's watching out for you and holding on to you. Not so much that like you have somebody to go to when things get rough, because kids don't want to say when things are hard most of the time. Like they might say it like just outwardly, but they're not going to like necessarily ask for help. But when you have somebody who's watching you, who's like present in your life, who can like lend that helping hand, it feels really valuable. And I guess I recognize that like the structure of our system and like our ideals and our values often lead to women missing out on opportunities that male students would get. Like she talks about this idea of like in the era of like sort of like Me Too, there's this sort of weird thing that has happened where some male professors who are attempting to escape the impression of being involved in kind of sexual assault will go the extra mile of saying like, oh, I'm not even going to be caught in a room alone with a student, like a female student, which like to them maybe might seem like a good step to protect them and protect the school or protect other people. But in reality, like what that means is that like a lot of female students are missing out on opportunities to get that kind of important one-on-one time with a professor that male students often get without a second thought. And like those are the moments that I recognize were important to me in my educational career. I feel very gifted that I had a lot of like women as my professors and my teachers who like really pushed me to thrive and explore. But I also really want to recognize like how tough it could be for a lot of people. And I know how tough it is for a lot of Black kids too, who similarly feel this. And then to think about like my Black female like classmates who had it like 2 degrees harder than me.
Right. And
like,
there's a layer of like a class issue there too, where like you were saying that part of the reason why you had this access to schooling is because your dad was so smart about like giving you that access. I think there's a lot of people that don't have, especially if they're from generations of being in a low-income background or being from that background, that maybe they don't have access to the information to navigate those systems.
Totally.
So there's so many nuanced layers to that too. It's funny, I know I made a joke when we first started this about the government and the art focus being so separate, but I completely see, I take it back.
No,
You're very married, I think, in what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess it does feel, it's sort of confusing because like for a while I did sort of have them warded off, you know? But like my experience with the arts is sort of like, I feel like much more funny than the experience with like politics, because politics was like, was like my personal vendetta to like prove to all the kids I went to middle school with that like I knew what I was talking about. I don't know. But in art, it was like, I got to like high school and took a couple art classes here or there, but didn't think too much of it. And then when I was like a senior, I did this project painting with Bob Ross because my high school, again, opportunity and privilege, paid for me to buy like Bob Ross art supplies and like cool. Literally oil paint with Bob Ross for 2 weeks. So that was like my last 2 weeks of high school.
Wow.
And then I like got to college and again, like left art behind. I was like, this isn't something I'm going to put much energy or time or money into. But meanwhile, like my roommate, like my freshman roommate was this kid, Isaac Gelb, who you can also find on Instagram. He's also a very talented artist, who at the time was just trying to get into drawing one. And when I saw him draw, I was always like, wow, he can just like do without thinking. Like he just draws and doesn't put much thought into it and like doodles and scribbles and makes these things that whether or not they're like exactly what he imagined initially, they're just fun for him, you know? And I don't have that. And so I just kind of like let it be for a while. And then COVID hits. And that like first fall of COVID, my friends and I lived in our friend Lily's house up in like Ellsworth, Maine. And Isaac was taking painting 1 down in the basement and drawing 2. And like every day that I would go down into that basement and see his art studio, I'd get so envious. I was just like, oh, he's just making art. He's just doing it. Like, why am I not making any art, you know? And then it's like, I guess I don't really have any supplies here. I don't have any supplies to make art. And then somebody told me that Bowdoin had this like really awesome opportunity to like for people on financial aid where the first $100 of your art supplies you pay for, and then the second $300 the school will pay for.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. If you're taking a photo class, it's even higher. That like the amount that they'll give you, because
really
like
good.
that stuff is expensive.
Yeah. Even painting supplies can get really pricey.
Yeah, exactly. And so
That's awesome.
And so at that point when I realized that was like an opportunity that was like laid at my feet, I was like, how dare I like miss this opportunity now?
Yeah.
And so I'd finished most of my gov classes that I needed to for the major by the end of like my sophomore year. And I was like, I guess I'm full sending with the art thing right now. It's like I literally have like 0 classes worth of space between me and not finishing the visual arts major.
Yeah.
So I have to basically take everything correctly in order to do this. And then I almost didn't do it. I almost actually didn't get it because I decided I wanted to do politics my senior year in the fall and try to do an honors project.
Yeah.
And so I dropped an art history class that I thought I needed. But the department made an exception for me and allowed me to like essentially count a film history class as an art history class.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I don't know. It felt like they were very similar things that we were doing. Like, we were doing visual analyses. We were looking at, like, the provenance and, like, the history of these things and having discussions about, like, cultural forms and media and stuff. And so I was realizing, oh, shoot, like, I'm kind of in a, like emotionally, I, like, had been sort of romantically heartbroken for a while. And I was like, this is really tough. And now I'm taking a class that's, like, African-American film, which is, like, traumatic for me as a black man, to be taking that class. I'm taking, like, Supreme Court simulation, which is, like, one of the hardest things I've had to do yet.
Yeah.
Sheesh, I don't even remember what the 4th class was at the time. And then I was like, something's not right. I don't feel like I'm doing all of my art stuff right. Like, I don't feel like I feel like I need something, like a space to make art that allows me to digest, like, what I'm learning in these other classes. Especially with that African-American film class. I was like, I need some place to make art to digest all this stuff, because this stuff is traumatic.
What kind of stuff were you guys watching in there?
I mean, it was some really, like, valuable stuff. I mean, we watched Daughters of the Dust. I believe that's Julie Dash. We watched Killer of Sheep. Like a number of, like, indie films, like independent black films. We watched some blaxploitation, like Sweet Sweetback's Badass Ride, which is, like, itself deeply traumatic. And Shaft. We watched, of course, the, like, sort of classics in the black, lexicon of, like, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and The Defiant Ones. So I think that, like, I was recognizing that there was this sort of, there was a culture around blackness in media that felt like something I needed to explore.
Yeah.
And I was feeling really damn inspired by blaxploitation as a movement, less so the actual directors in blaxploitation, because like, of course, they were like, a lot of them were sexist and a lot of them were homophobic, and like, so there were a lot of troubles with a lot of what they were making, but they were also making like radical films that didn't fit the normal discussion of black people in media, Was
it a 1970s film movement, or was
it
the 80s? Or
I think it was like it really took off in the 70s. And it was like part of it was this idea that, like, if you've ever I don't know if you guys have seen like The Defiant Ones or Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
I haven't seen the movies.
Yeah, they're classic films with like the illustrious Sidney Poitier, who is a man who every time it seemed like he showed up in a movie, he was playing this like hyper-vigilant sort of like perfect vision of a black man, which isn't bad. Like, it's not bad to see a black man who's doing something like healthy or like acting maturely in like situations. Because like at that point in time, it was in a bit a response to like minstrelsy and the existence of blackness as more of a joke than as something reasonable and like honest and just human about people. And so like it really was like white liberals like pushing and like also some black liberals as well pushing for a new form of blackness to be shown, but it came with respectability politics, where all of a sudden it was like, okay, so now we're not actually escaping the stereotypes that have been set out for black people. We're kind of just allowing one of those stereotypes to die while the other one to thrive, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, there's this interesting kind of idea that I got from some critical theorist last year that was talking about, like, the dichotomy of racial stereotypes. Mm-hmm. And this idea that, at least for a black man, there's kind of two stereotypes that you fit into, right? You either fit into the like, mandingo, like hypersexualized, hyper like vicious, like woman stealing black man, you know, which is itself like sort of, you know, like pretty damn disgusting as an ideal, because like when you're put into that box, you don't get to be anything other than sexual, right, or a sexual creature. And then on the other side, you have the Uncle Tom, the asexual man who only is there to like provide you with sort of like magical ideals or values, or like to support you in your way as a white person to like thrive in your own world. So it kind of is like incorporating the ideals of like the magical Negro trope as well, right? And so like if you look at a lot of or a lot of media with black people in it, it kind of fits black men into like one of these two roles. For black women, there's similar roles where it's like the Jezebel, like the like hypersexual sort of like horror woman. Yeah. That's one of them. There's the mammy, the like asexual mammy who exists again for like the magical Negro trope. And then there's like the one that was kind of invented by the Republican Party in like the 80s and the 90s, which is the welfare queen, you know, which isn't necessarily like a sexual creature, but is one that is like taking and thieving. And so like these are tropes that like I feel we need to recognize and dismantle, you know, like, and dismantling them is not an easy thing. But I was fascinated by artists like Kara Walker and Betty Saar. Like, I was fascinated by Carrie James Marshall, and like essentially just a number of different artists who were willing to incorporate like some of the imagery of like minstrelsy and anti-blackness in like white American culture. To highlight sort of the reality, or like I guess the stupidity of racism, and like how race is this construct that doesn't really have any cohesive message or logic to it. And so like I guess when I was getting to that point, it felt like this was my route towards connecting these disparate concepts of like politics and art. Because here I am talking about very political values and concepts, but doing so through a discussion of like art. And I guess, you know, I like that's one of those things that I still need to work on, and I need to put some more time into like really like thoroughly crafting. But my most recent like sort of body of work has really been, I think, centered around this value of like, I guess this sort of like blaxploitation value, really, of what happens when I take ownership over my own identity? Like, what happens when I take this radical step to make a picture of me, for me? And there's something about black self-portraiture that feels really radical. And I don't exactly understand why it feels so radical, but there's something just about putting a black person on paper that feels like a radical step, you know? And so my work has been a lot of like self-portraits. It's been a lot of images of like, I mean, actually, I guess I've only made like one image of like I haven't made very many images of like non like black or Jewish or queer people, and so I don't know. I guess there's some interest in doing that because like I don't really see any reason not to show other people of other backgrounds and show the diversity of all human beings. But it does feel like there's something radical in the art that I've been making through portraiture too. You know?
Yeah, I think that there definitely is, because when you're talking about these tropes that exist in art already, a lot of them are not coming from the people that they're depicting. You know, like these tropes are presented by maybe white people of all different backgrounds that are disparaging. So to have an accurate depiction, like a self-portrait, like this is me, this is how I exist in a neutral state, like this is just what it is a radical thing. Yeah. And that's the body of work that you had in your solo show that just closed, right?
Totally, yeah.
Very cool, awesome. Yeah. That was in Belmont.
Yeah, it was really exciting. I mean, last like November, I guess I was just sort of like in a weird mental state for a little while. I had come out of being sick. I was feeling some new things coming into my life that I wasn't really sure about. And I was just walking around. My mom forced me and my brother to take care of the family dog for like for like 3 weeks too. It was hilarious. She was like, "Oh, I need you to take care of her for 1 week early in November, and then like 1 week the week after Thanksgiving, but not the week of Thanksgiving." And then sure enough, we took care of her all 3 weeks. But like I was walking my dog and I was like, the Belmont Media Center, that's totally the place that I found online when I Googled like studio space in Massachusetts or like art studio space in Massachusetts. That was like the only thing that seemed to come up when I first did it back during COVID. But I never thought, I'd be in Belmont living there. And now it's like right down the street from where I live. So I walked in one day and I met this woman, Liz Stoles, who was just like a nice lady to like welcome me into the space. And she was telling me that she's the gallery coordinator there right now, and she's looking for artists, especially Belmont-based artists, but artists more generally, who will come in and make art and like show it in their space.
So it's like a residency.
I mean, sort of. I guess it was like, like I didn't have to make any art there. I mean, and
gotcha.
it's more of like a place that rents out like studio space if you want to like record a TV show or like a radio podcast or something like that.
Yeah.
More so than anything, and they have like a hallway in the front where you can like put up all art on their like hanging system or whatever.
Yeah.
They're very proud of their hanging system.
Or is it the tracks at the top of the ceiling with the wires?
Oh, that's awesome.
That's so funny because we both did a art show at a media center that had the same apparatus with the wire hanger on the track.
They're cool, honestly.
Yeah.
No,
you
they're
can
really
adjust
good.
it. It's like very
They
professional.
must have all compared notes with
Yeah, they're like, this is what we need.
Yeah. The cutting edge.
Yeah, I mean, and like, I think she was just looking for somebody to do it. And she was like, "Hey, you want a show?" And I was like, yeah. She's like, "Okay, you're on. Yeah, it's March." I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, you're putting on a show in March. That's your thing." And so for the next few months, it was me trying to collect my work. And like, I guess I was trying to like get some support from some other people and like advice from other people I knew who like had art up and stuff.
Yeah.
And then it kind of just came down to me going through all of the self-portraits I had made in my like, and I guess I didn't even finish that project, that's train of thought. But when I was like struggling with all of my stuff my senior year, I convinced the department to allow me to also add a 5th class, which was a senior studio in visual arts, which was like the one requirement that every visual arts student had to take.
Yeah.
Where you conduct like an independent studio practice for a semester. And you can make anything that you want to collect a body of work. And so for me, I was collecting a body of work that was my self-portraits. And so at the end of like last spring, come May, I had, I wouldn't say hundreds. I had like tens of self-portraits, like a whole bunch of different things in different media. I had sculptures, I had paintings and drawings and prints and photography.
That's cool.
And so it was a little bit of like me getting to pick and choose and be like, now what do I want to show together? Like, what is the stuff that feels like the most important to have in like one solid group? And then since then, like, there was the summer where I didn't really have the space or the facilities because I was back home with my parents to make art. And then come the fall, I moved in with my older brother up in Belmont. And so like I started making self-portraits again. And since then, it's felt like the experience has kind of taken off. Like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it feels like I've been doing that sort of like radical step of just like making an image that allows me to just be me for a moment. And I think what's hard is that like I've been like dumped and I've like, met people who I really like had deep connections with, and I've like gone for jobs and not gotten them, and I've had nights where like I just didn't want to be seen or talked to, and like throughout a lot of those experiences I've made art, and I've made self-portraits, and I think that like it means that like my body of work feels sort of autobiographical in a sense, like just sort of showing a moment in my life for a second, but it also feels like it's a little bit of the care side of it too, of like what happens when you really take the time to look at yourself.
Right.
And I realized that there was this like feeling of repulsion I had to looking in the mirror for a long time. and I didn't really understand why, because it wasn't like I didn't like myself, and it wasn't like I thought I was ugly or anything, but for some reason when I looked in the mirror, I just didn't like what I saw. And through self-portraiture, it's given me a new love for my face, a new love for like the curves of faces and the way that people's faces are like constructed, and like it's honestly given me a love for like bodies generally, and like just like looking at sort of the beauty of like the physical creation of human beings, you know. And so like I don't know, it's really changed my mentality a lot. I think that if you had asked me at the beginning of 2023 about like my worldview and how I was feeling about like my future and the things that I cared about, I would have felt I felt very nervous. I was very scared. I was about to graduate from college. I didn't have a job. I was committing to take a 5th class that was just making art. While I already felt like I was like falling behind in my like 4 other classes.
I was gonna say, you mentioned that it was like a sort of place to breathe and like a catharsis, but that's a really intense. Like a studio class is a big deal. It was crazy because I was taking the like Supreme Court simulation, African American film. So those were 2 like sort of more, I guess like. Supreme Court simulation was the only traditional like book or like reading kind of class, where I had to like be in text and writing essays and stuff like that. African American film was more about like watching movies and writing essays based on those movies, so still a little more traditional. And then I was in a class called Armature and Surface, which was doing like écorché studies and sculpting the human form. Oh, cool.
Intense.
Yeah, and I did a portrait bust of my own head at the end of it that felt like sort of similar, but like still not a great resemblance. And then I was taking drawing 2, which was drawing to the figure. So we were drawing human beings in one of my classes as well. But I realized that like 2 of those classes, like the figure drawing class and my écorché study class, were both like sort of technical based studio courses that weren't about like developing my own independent practice, but were much more about following like a course direction, like figuring out, okay, how are we going to learn these new skills today through this project, as opposed to what can I create with the skills that I have. And it felt like having that studio space all of a sudden really did feel like, it felt like I was breathing, because I was like, okay, like I'm not just making stuff for like an assignment, I'm making stuff for me. Like I'm making whatever I want, whenever I want. And it gave me justification to show up there at 1 a.m. and like to like stay there till late at night. And like I love that I had my like roommate Isaac there too, who like me and him had already spent like 3 semesters making art together in that building. So some nights it'd be like him in his studio and me in my studio, and we'd meet up at like midnight and go, you know, I don't know, maybe I don't need to say it, but you know, go outside for a quick break, you know, and then come back in and keep making some more art, you know.
That's awesome.
And so like I don't know, it's also hard for me now, like I guess that it makes me really miss my friend, you know. It makes me miss those moments a little bit of like, wow, how beautiful it was to live that aristocratic life. My professor, like my junior year, Professor Yarbrough at Bowdoin, she's like super conservative professor who teaches political theory, but one of the things she liked that I really totally agree with her about is going to college for most kids is the most aristocratic life that an American can live. You go to a place, you have easy access to like cleaning your clothes and getting spaces that you use every day clean. You have food cooked for you that you don't have to, that you just go and you pay for, or you don't pay for, you swipe for. You have spaces where you can go and work out. You have class lesson plans planned for you. Like there was a time in this world where if you wanted to get an education, you had to have a private tutor. And now we have an entire institution that's built around our education. So like we are given some like very serious privileges that feel super significant to me. And that was like a gift to me, to recognize that, I think, as a junior, because it made me look at college a little differently. I mean, and I think I always sort of saw it as like, this is what I'm paying for. Like at the end of the day, I'm going to have to pay off my student loans. So I might as well get the most out of my academics as I can. And like a little bit of that, if it was that, and a little bit of it was like, I just want to mess around with my friends and have a good time, you know?
That's good that you were self-aware about that during it. I feel like for a lot of people, like my experience with college was just like blowing through it and like experiencing it and loving it, but not realizing that post-college was not going to be the same thing at all. So it can be a harsh awakening, definitely. It's nice when you can be in spaces where there's still artists in your life, when you get to have conversations like this one, where you're talking about these concepts, but not everybody has access to that in the day-to-day. So it's
totally
definitely a privilege to be able to do that back to back to the point where it's insufferable.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, totally.
It is really interesting because like I have that made me think of like times where like I used to be a part of like kind of an art collective where we had like a big giant like shared studio, and even though it was like, you know, we were all paying way too much money to be there and we're wasting so much time and probably, you know, almost losing professional opportunities by doing it because we weren't working on our real careers as much as just focusing on art and fun. But I relate to that so much that it was like, you know, it's almost like you either lose all of your money to live how rich people live, or you're rich and you live how rich people live or something, you know. And that's kind of how it felt.
yeah.
I don't know. It was a good time. But to go back to something you were saying earlier, I really loved your focus on self-portraits too, because something we talked about before is that I feel like portraiture in general is seen in like two different ways, where it's either you're contemplating the psychology of the subject or the painter, you know. And I feel like self-portraiture is so powerful of a medium because you're doing both, you know, very much so, because you're looking at this image and you're like, what is this painting thinking?
Totally.
And what is this painter thinking, you know? So
there was this, that reminds me, so when I was taking drawing 1 at Bowdoin, our professor, Mary Hart, had us take a trip to the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. And while we were there, we saw an exhibition that was curated by my friend Lily Weaver. It was about pastels and the use of pastels in like works that really like hadn't been shown much at the museum at all, because of like just sort of what happens with works on paper, that they just don't get shown very often.
Yeah, they're light sensitive.
true.
Yeah, and so because of that, like, it was really cool to get to see an exhibition that was doing that. And there was one drawing, almost verges on painting, that really like stuck out the most to me, and I can't remember its name, but it was a work by the artist Robert Arneson. Gosh, if I could remember the name, it's essentially like an image of his face, like giant, on this huge piece of paper, really impressionistically like sculpted onto this paper, but it looks as though his face is getting squished under a pane of glass.
Oh, wow.
And when I saw it for the first time, it was him sort of like, I read the object description, and like he died, I think, in like the 80s, I believe, like while he was in his 60s. I believe, I'm forgetting, but he died of like I think colorectal cancer.
Oh, wow.
And it was a work that was a little bit reflective of his feeling of like getting MRIs and like CAT scans and stuff, and like sort of being under the knife for surgeries and that experience. And I don't know why, but like it felt like there was something speaking to me about this idea that like when you're feeling some kind of like real visceral discomfort, like art can be a practice that can help you to sort of like decentralize that pain from like the core of who you are.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I recognize, like, when I get really sick, I'll like lie in bed and think, oh, this is my life, like this is everything, like sickness is all that I am. But something about like making an image that sort of solidifies the moment makes me recognize like this isn't everything. This is just now. This is just right this moment. And things will change, whether in ways that I like or ways that I don't like. But like it's sort of about temporality, you know. And so when I like got the opportunity to make art, I was so inspired specifically by his work, really. I mean, I think his really spoke the most to me, that I was like, I need to use this. Like, I need to like start doing self-portraits. And Robert Arneson was somebody who had done self-portraiture for like a long time. Like, it was a large part of his own body of work. But like, there were two things about it. One is that he didn't really see it as self-portraiture, because he often talked about how like he was using his face because it was there, and it was easy. not because he wanted to paint a picture of himself necessarily or draw one of himself. And two, the weird thing about me seeing one of his drawings as my first introduction to him is that he didn't see himself as a draftsman. He saw himself as a sculptor first and foremost. He was like a ceramic artist.
Interesting.
Very well known as a ceramic artist in California, I believe. And then he came to drawing as a means for preparing for his sculptures. And I think that there's something really sculptural about a lot of the stuff that he drew, which is why it feels so special to me. And I think, like, being somebody who had some experience with sculpture, it made a lot of sense to me that, like, there could be this marriage between these two media. And I don't know, like, I guess I don't remember where I started with all of that, but there's something just, like, that felt really special about it that drove me towards wanting to do, like, sort of self-portraits, whether or not it was for drawing me or just drawing the moment or just drawing because I need somebody to draw.
Yeah.
And it was easy. It made it a lot easier because I didn't have to go out and find things to draw. It was like, okay, it's Monday morning. It's or I guess Monday afternoon. I have nothing else to do for the rest of the day until practice. I'm going to go into my art studio and draw myself.
Yeah.
And I honestly, because I've done a lot of self-portraits in the past too. I haven't in a while, but I remember when I was in art school in the figure drawing class, we would have live models all the time, and I had a lot of paintings from that of, like, because occasionally the professor, he would be like, oh, you're doing portraits today, or incorporate the face, whatever. And I ended up with a lot of paintings of random people from the class, and I actually really hated it because, like, they were nice people. Like, I met the models and they were great, but I remember just like, oh yeah, that's Amanda up there on the, or like, oh yeah, that's Fred, that old guy that was there Thursday night.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it didn't like, but when I would have a ton of, I have, like, there's paintings of Theo all over the place there's paintings of Theo that Theo drew, or paintings of me, and that makes me feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
Like, to see, people I know or myself or something.
Yeah.
Because I don't really have many decorations that other people made. I have some. If I do collect art from people, they're very small pieces. Yeah. Because it's cheaper, really. But, if I'm going to support people, unfortunately, I'm buying the smallest thing that they're selling or something. But, but yeah, so I kind of, like, I feel like that was another weird thing that drove me towards that kind of art is, I just remember, like, having paintings of other people and just being like, not wanting to look at them.
It's so weird because I'm working on a series right now. I'm working on a series right now that I'm painting photographs that I took of me and my friends like 10 years ago, like really old things from my old Facebook or whatever. And it's so surprisingly emotional to be doing portraits of people that I was close to at that time, and maybe we still are, or maybe we aren't anymore, but it's so, like, weirdly intimate, and I hadn't, like, thought about that in a while. It's just really funny to kind of sit with yourself when you're doing portraits or self-portraits and observe the feelings that come up. Yeah. Like when you were talking about, like, when you first were doing it, these feelings of, like, kind of repulsion at first, of not really wanting to engage with it. Yeah. And, like, kind of recognizing that and being like, well, what does this mean? Is this a reaction to the art piece? Is it a reaction to myself? Is this the experience? Am I uncomfortable? And what does that discomfort mean? Yeah. And how that translates to when you're doing portraits of other people, like, I'm uncomfortable because I don't know this person, or I'm uncomfortable because I had a close connection with this person at one time, or I think it can really show you things that maybe you wouldn't have experienced or realized without sitting with that work or that portrait of that person for a couple hours on end. Yeah. So it's meditative in a way.
Really, yeah. I think, like, there was a moment, like, my senior year where I had, like, reconnected with a woman who I had, like, been romantically involved with for a little while, like, the year before. And, like, we had reconnected in part because, like, we had drawn together when we were first seeing each other, and it was something that, like, she wasn't an artist, like, she didn't really draw much, and I remember her saying, like, Carl, I don't draw, like, I don't do that, you don't understand, Carl, I don't draw. And we just, like, sat on my bed one day and, like, drew, and like, she kept drawing for a while after that, and over the years she, like, now draws a little bit and, like, does her thing. But one day I brought her into my studio last spring, and I honestly felt sort of, like, conflicted, because here I was, like, spending this time, like, drawing both myself and drawing her, and, like, her drawing herself in my studio, which, like, just felt like a really confusing moment for me, like, emotionally. And I think part of the reason why, like my photography professor, Mike Colster, he used to say that one of the most like one of the greatest signs of love or showings of love that you can give to somebody is like sort of undivided attention. That if you can really like pay real attention to people, like they feel that love.
Yeah.
And in order to like take photographs or make photographs or draw or paint somebody, like you need to be able to at least pay attention to what you see on a page, if not what you're seeing in person. And so that attention, like if you see that attention as love and you see paintings as love, it feels really confusing when like the feelings of the practice don't necessarily line up with your feelings outside of making art with that person.
Yeah.
You know, like drawing somebody I don't love or don't love anymore, but showing them this attention of love felt really like confusing. Not bad, but confusing, you know?
That's interesting. That's an interesting thing to sit with.
Yeah.
I did I was talking earlier about the art collective that I was a part of. We were doing like years ago like a featured artist like thing. Long story short, essentially we had an artist in there who had tons of like these exciting drawings of people and places, and it was like very illustrative and stuff. And I made these pictures. I photographed a bunch of it to make social media promotional stuff. And I sent it to the artist and was like, oh, like, how do you like these? And they were like, oh my God, like, you can't use those photos. That's a drawing of my ex.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, why is it in the show? but I think back to that because I admired a lot that, like, there was probably so much tension. Because to me, I thought these were just colorful, fun drawings of people and stuff.
Yeah. Right.
It was actually a complex, emotional... serious body of work.
Oh Lord!
So we had to change all of the promotional stuff.
Oh God!
Props to them though. That's crazy.
Yeah, good times.
That's an interesting thing too, because what you're talking about, like that tension and that value in those pieces, is something that could never be understood by an unrelated viewer. Like that's a process that is a really powerful emotional process that exists just for the artist or the sitter or both, which I think is pretty cool. Like the way that I think about my art practice a lot is like process focused, where sometimes I make art about things where I'm just trying to understand how I feel about something, and I kind of let what I make tell me that. Like I'll make it, I'll sit with it, and then I'll observe it and see how I feel about it and what that brings to mind for me. And I think that is something that is really hard to explain to people that haven't done that. Even if maybe it's somebody that just doesn't see their art that way, but I actually haven't met anybody that doesn't in some way have that experience.
Like have a completely impersonal view.
Yeah, nobody does that actually. I was going to say maybe other artists, but I don't think anybody makes art and goes, I don't care about this or have any feelings.
You know, I knew one kid back in the day at Bowdoin who, like, his perspective, he was like, I just want to make the most beautiful thing I can. And that was his main perspective. So it didn't seem like it was a spiritual thing. It didn't seem like he was like trying to go after some exploration. Yeah. It was just, how can I make the most beautiful, and he like, let's make the most beautiful like vase that I could possibly make, and that's my goal. You know, it's
aesthetic purist.
Yeah, I mean, respect to it. I think that there's some value in taking that direction too, but it's just not the direction I see for my art, you know. But I think it's because I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
I have a lot to say, so like to like make art that doesn't speak for me feels like at some moments like a waste of time, you know.
I relate to that.
Yeah, and I like too the way you think about it. Seems like it's fusing. You're not just saying something with your art, but you're also kind of crossing over into art commentary and criticism with your art. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because I like to think of like, you know, like a lot of people really struggle with their artist statements in the beginning, or like, what is my art about? How do I blah, 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 whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like the easiest way to like, was like, what were you thinking about when you made it?
Yeah.
Just like, regardless, no matter what it is, that's probably what your art is about, is the things you were thinking about. So
yeah,
because a lot of people, you know, get really lost in the sauce with the verbosity or whatever. But I mean, I would imagine a lot of your work is like exploring a lot of the concepts that we've been talking about. You know, as you've said. So it's like, the work is already done, I guess, in terms of the artist statement. But I don't know. I don't make art like that a lot, but I definitely feel like, because what am I trying to say? I try to caution myself. Hold on. Sorry.
No worries.
No, I feel like I've
Lost
feel like
in the sauce of verbosity.
right, I feel like I've made a lot of art about art in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I try to like stop myself when I do that a lot, because sometimes I'm like, I'm probably saying something stupid or something that's been said a million times, and I'm just upset or something. So I don't know.
There's this that kind of reminds me. So there's this artist, Lois Mayu Jones, very pretty like renowned black female artist, like Black American artist. Actually, one of her works is in the like Art of Africa galleries here at the museum.
Cool.
Can't remember the names of those galleries, but it's like a painting that she did. But when I was in college taking like African American art history, because that's another class that I got to take, which is fascinating, we talked about this painting of hers called Le Fétiche. She painted it while she was studying in France, in like Paris. It was before I think she had actually ever visited Africa. But it's a work that includes various like masks and like it's a painting of masks and fetishes, like statuettes. And it's fascinating because apparently like her professors, like different people who are critics of her work at the moment, said they didn't really like it because it was like overly referential and derivative of like the Cubists. And so it was this weird moment where she was being told by like white people that like her work is derivative of Cubists, and like the response was like, oh, so you're gonna tell a black woman using African like imagery that she's being overly referential and derivative of Cubists. Meanwhile, you have like Pablo Picasso with African masks and fetishes in his like in his studios.
Yeah.
Clearly having like references to them in his works, like what is it, like La Avignon, like I can't remember the name of that painting.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Gosh.
the women of something is the translation. Yeah, that is obscene.
Yeah.
That is horrible.
So it's like here's this like black woman in like the 40s, 50s or something, like painting and being like, wow, so this is what happens when a black person uses like imagery that is culturally like identifiable with their ancestry, right? And so sometimes it's like, wow, like we live in this age where it's like that South Park line. It's like Simpsons did it. It's like no matter what we do today, it's like you're referencing something, whether subconsciously or not. And I think that's sort of the beauty of it. It's like that's why art is so much like an audience-based thing. It's like what is your audience how are they going to react? And you can try to craft their experience of reacting with your art, but like if you're not considering where they come from and what they do, then you might not be able to reach them where you want to. But also sometimes you get surprised and you make something that just like conveys the same message to a lot of people, you know?
Yeah, that was not what you intended.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely done that online. You know what's something I've started to do recently, more so with music, but I also do with visual art, is keeping like an actual list of artists and references that random people will be like, oh, this reminds me of this person, or this reminds me of this band. Because over the years, whenever someone has done that or said that kind of thing, I'm just like, I brush it off, or I'm like, oh, whatever. Or maybe when I was younger, I'd even be a little bit like, no, it's mine. Like, I'm not like anything, which is stupid. But but doing that, keeping that list and like actually going and researching whatever the thing, are like, it's given me so much more dimension in my mind and so much more nuance as to what, because especially with music, because people will be like, oh, this reminds me of this band, never even heard of them, but then I listen to them and my song is literally like exactly the same as the song, and I'm like, well, it is exactly the same. What am I to do about this? But I don't know, like. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too because I feel like artists resonate off of each other, especially like generationally and culturally. So there are examples I can think of where I've found an artist that I had never heard of before, but I'm like, I can see the through line from this work to mine because of artists in between, or maybe my art teacher in middle school like knew about this artist and really liked them, or I learned about this artist who was in the same school as they were, or in the same like school of thought as they were, and they had similar ideas and I built off of it and happened to land in a similar direction. And maybe it is my own thing, maybe I didn't regurgitate it, but I also am, because we exist in this web of cultural exchange.
That's a good point.
It's wild. I find that so fascinating and really fun too, because I feel like that's where the art of curation comes in, because you can intentionally harness those references and say, like, this has a connection to this, and make an argument that even if it wasn't what the artist intended, it's still valid because the viewer recreates the piece with their own cultural background, their own experiential background, which is really cool.
Totally. There was this moment where I was like my junior year, I made one of my favorite projects I've done, I think, was I cast my face in plaster, and then I sculpted sort of like a faux back to it, like, so it was like a full head on like a stand. And then I used liquid latex, and I brushed it over, like brushable latex over the entire thing to craft like a balloon. And I closed it and I sealed it and I put a little like valve on it so I could blow it up. And the idea was to have it be like hung from like a little like ring at the top of it. And so I put it in, like, one of the art department really loved that project. They were just like, wow, this is like nothing like we've seen recently. Like,
that's super cool.
And so they wanted it to be in like the front gallery, which felt like a privilege in like our building. And so I put this thing up, and one of like the older professors within the department, Mark Wetley, who is like really like a very talented like painter and draftsman, like really, really talented artist. He came up to me, and like I had like barely even spoken to this guy before, like didn't really know who he was very much. And he's like, Carl, like, I think this is incredible. He was always really encouraging to me, which I knew he wasn't to everybody. So like it felt like I didn't know why he was so encouraging to me, but it was very nice. But he was like, Carl, I gotta say, this reminds me of the Final Judgment from the Sistine Chapel. And I was like, huh? And he's like, yeah, if you look at it, there's this like image of like the flayed skin of like Saint Bartholomew, I think it is.
Oh, wow.
Hanging over the knee of like a celestial angel, right? And when Michelangelo painted it, it's like fairly clear if you look at it that like it seems as though Michelangelo painted his own body as like this flayed skin. So it looks like his face on this thing, and he's like, there's something through what you've done here where like you've painted the skin onto this mask, that like this head that you've created, and now you've peeled that skin back and you've released it for us to see as like a flayed thing on its own. And it felt like raw and like, I don't know, it felt like interesting. But like when he told me that, I was like, I wasn't referencing that at all. Like this is just an idea I came up with out of the blue one day when I was like, I want to make like silhouettes, but I need to make something 3-dimensional and inflatable for the class. So like, how can I marry these things together? And it had no reference to this. But when he said that, I was like, well, this is like something that sort of elevates the project in a sense. Not because it's the same thing or because I am making that clear reference, but at least because it feels like I am touching on like an idea that is human. Like I'm touching on a feeling that other humans have felt before. Which is sort of like, I don't know, maybe it's that recognition, like I'm not hot shit. Like I don't know who I am. Like I don't know what I am. But I like to make art, and I can make art. And sometimes I use it to make gruesome images of myself too. You know? I don't know. It's like, I'm no longer like, I feel like I embrace the references in like a way that sometimes feels a little silly, because it's like you can be like so referential that now your work is just like a weird conglomeration of you touching on everybody else's projects that you've seen. But also sometimes I think you can make stuff that feels original to you in the moment. And that's even if it's referential to other stuff and other people see it as that, like it's you, it's your thing, you know?
And it is really cool too when it's an accidental reference, because like when you were telling that story, what I'm thinking is like, that's so cool. Like if it was me, I would feel legitimized because it's a connection to the Sistine Chapel. Like it's crazy. So the perspective of like I'm feeling something that Michelangelo felt is like that's so profound. That's more important than the cloud, I guess. But
gosh,
I think that's a really cool thing to consider, that like if your art is similar to something that's come before and you didn't know that or mean that, it's not just that artistic lineage or that like technical practice or that approach that's the same. It's that like feeling it's the same, which is that transcends time. That's such a cool thing.
I actually like, I think that very much so is like so in line with what I do in self-portraiture, because like I went through that whole project. I was like really trying to discuss these ideas of like my identity as a black man, and then at the end of this like course of doing all of this, I was told when I was applying for a job to come up with like my own little lecture, like a presentation to give. It was like an admissions job at a school, and I was like applying for it. And I was like, I want to talk about Black self-portraiture. So I started doing research, and I found some writings, and I found this scholar who was like, oh, there's this weird thing that happens for Black people when they make self-portraits where like they're recognizing three things. Is like the identity that they feel internally about themselves, there's the identity that they have on their outside that they express to the world, and then there's the identity which is sort of like imposed upon them by like the racial hierarchy or like the racial caste system, right? And so, like, whereas a white person might not recognize that third one or have to deal with that third one because they, like, live in the, like, social default, a Black person doesn't. So they have to kind of, like, interact with this thing. So I'm reading this, and I'm like, wait, why is this, like, not literally what I've been thinking about all semester? Like, this is my project. Like, is this person just accurate? Like, do they just know what all Black, like, self-portrait artists are doing? Because that can't be the thing, right? But I was like, wow, maybe this is something. Maybe there's something here, you know? I love art. Art's so fun.
It kind of reminds me of I'm reading this book right now. I'm very, very slowly, but it's by the music producer guy Rick Rubin. But he talks about, it's kind of like a weird spiritual concept. But he was saying that, like, in the book he always refers to something called source, which he refers to as just the greater spiritual, artistic, whatever we access. And he says like he thinks that ideas appear in the source spiritually and just go to whoever acts on it. You know what I mean? And that's what, like, kind of this idea that, you know, where you see art that you thought of, that you wanted to make, that somebody else made before you, or something, or
damn it.
or parallel thinking, or people from the past thinking the exact same things as you independently when you didn't even know that they existed. And it's just like, I don't know, because, like, I know you talked about, like, religion and stuff, and I'm not religious. I'm not religious. I'm spiritual. Just kidding. But, like, I know it's like a thing people say, but, like, I believe in something. I'm just kind of agnostic, I guess. But I think that there is some weird, like, you know, I think art does connect you to something that connects you to everything else. You know, and I think studying history does that too. I think just maybe learning in general just does that. I don't know. Maybe that's what being human is.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I think we had a really good conversation with an artist, Mark Liam Smith, who he told us that when he was in school, one of the things that he studied was linguistics. And we were like, that's... So every time I say this, I'm so wrong. But I was like, that's so funny. That's so different from art. Like, so different. So cool. I love when people completely prove me wrong when I say that. I should stop saying it. But he was talking about how, for him, and in his perspective, art is another language. Like, it has a function of human connection, essentially. And I think that history serves that same purpose, if you look at it that way. And, like, I think you can explore people's intention by looking at their art, and you can explore people's, like, you just get a lot of context, I think, through history, through cultural exposure, like travel, learning other languages, like linguistics, and art history, contemporary art. Like, all of these things seek to convey or to portray the experience of somebody who has lived or is living now. And I think a big part of that, which ties it into what you're talking about with politics and political identity and social identity, is understanding your starting point to be able to even consume that truth and see if the way that you're perceiving it is skewed in any way by your experiences, your privileges, your context, and being able to see what they intended from their perspective. That's also not everybody's coming from a different place, and it's really cool to me to be able to kind of bridge those gaps in as many ways as I can. I think art can be a really powerful tool for that, because it does transcend a lot of these restrictive things if we're looking at it in a way that we're trying to be all-inclusive. It's hard to be perfect about that, because, like, we're not all at the same starting point from like how we're perceiving everything, but it's very cool to think of it in that way versus just making, or not just, because this is valid too, but making just aesthetic objects when you're tying it into the history and the culture and the contemporary context or the context of the time. It's really interesting to kind of identify where you sit in that and how you relate to other artists that are in your school of thought, in your literal school, in the area around you. I think that can be really powerful.
My friend Isaac, I think, like, one of the things that I had the most fun with last year was he was like really getting into like critical queer theory, and
Yeah.
like I had some experience with like critical race theory, and sort of embedded within those like fields of thought is very much so like linguistics, and like this kind of conversation about like symbolism and like signifiers and stuff like that too, which I don't know, I think it's so interesting because it gets down to like the very core of like what we're talking about. And I guess it's that combination of like, what is it, like phenomenology of like ideas and like sort of a discussion of there's like I can't remember what they call it, but it's the study of thought. Gosh, there's a word for that.
I don't know.
I'll remember it like tonight when I'm at home and like want to punch myself in the face. But like I guess it kind of connects to this idea of like there are some things that transcend the ability that we have to speak, and there's always that like slippage, they call it, between like the words that we use to describe a thing and the actual experience of like experiencing that thing. And as close as we might try to get these two things to match, there will always be like some distance between the experience of a thing and how we can describe a thing. And I think what's fun about some art forms is that it gives us the ability to like actually give somebody an experience in the moment, you know?
Right.
And I think that some forms of art are like less able to do that and some are more. And I think that that's why like in my past I've like spoken word and poetry and storytelling, because it feels like sort of the more close side of like language and like the like words literally,
Right.
And the ability of them to like match the experience, because you're giving someone an experience when you tell a story too, right? Another thing that came to my mind while we were talking here too is like one thing was like Dali and like the surrealists and the idea of the sublime, like the idea of like being dwarfed by like the grandness of like the universe. But another thing I was thinking about was how like I kind of got really into like talking about like some elements of like astronomy, and like I don't really know much about quantum theory, but I think it's so fascinating that essentially we've gotten to this point where we know that like the universe is made up of these things called quarks, and like it's made up of these like itsy bitsy little like tiny subparticles that sometimes act as particles and sometimes act as waves. And so like it's all dependent on whether or not like we're observing them, where they act as waves when we're not observing them, but as soon as we observe these things they start acting as physical objects, as like as real particles, right? And then there's the idea of like there's what they call virtual particles that exist in the universe, out in space. So like empty space in the universe is filled up with all of these little things that pop into existence for a moment and then disappear. Like particles that are there for a second and then gone, right? Like it's like these vibrations, these like slight little vibrations and nothingness, you would think, right? And on the edge of like a black hole, there's this thing where like nothing can escape like the immense like gravitational pull of a black hole. So what's happening with these virtual particles, I guess theoretically, is that there's two things that balance each other out, like a positron and a negatron or something like that. It's like there's two particles, and when they strike each other, they cancel out and they disappear. But on the edge of a black hole, one of these particles gets pulled in. So then you actually see mass ejecting from black holes because there's not this like opposite particle to make these things exist or like disappear. I don't really know if I'm explaining this super well because I'm not a quantum physicist, but like it's all connected to like the feelings I have about the universe, which is that like we live in a universe that is one thing. It's all one thing. We can't, like, as much as you might want to express the idea that we are individuals, all, like, everything in the universe is all individual or whatever, like, also, the whole universe is one thing.
Yeah.
And, like, from its core, even if whether you believe in science or you believe in God, right? Like, either way, it's one thing that was created by one thing, right? And so if you, like, look at it that way, sometimes it feels like, okay, so maybe like the real pull of this universe is to figure out the ways that we can connect to all of these other parts of this one thing. Because like, how is a body, like it's the House Divided speech from Abraham Lincoln. Now I'm like working politics in it too, right? Of like, you know, like how is a body gonna survive if you have like limbs fighting against each other, you know?
Right.
And like how would we know if we're not part of some bigger thing that like is all encompassing and all being to us, right? But we spend like so much of our energy fighting against the world, fighting against nature, fighting against the universe, the experience of life and death, when like life and death are like also like part of this experience of this one thing, you know? Like I as a human being feel like every cell in my body is me, but every cell in my body, like most of the cells in my body, I guess not all, like will die and be like reborn as other cells, you know, and that will come into their place, and I won't even personally really notice the difference. But to the cell, maybe they notice the difference, right? Like I don't know, like a cell just wants to survive just like a human wants to survive, right? And the whole universe is filled with these like life, which is like these things that are just trying to stay alive as long as they can / reproduce or not die or whatever. I don't know. Like it just makes art feel so much more important, because art's like one really good way of connecting us across all of these like separations of this universe. I get so excited by this. This is like, and as a kid who grew up as like a Christian, and I still like believe in God and have this like Christian value to it, like it feels very connected to my beliefs in Christianity, as I've sort of like been trying to explore more ideas in like Buddhism and Islam, and like, you know, a lot, like my brother's really into Rastafari, and like so I don't know, it's been interesting to like learn about how there are these like common threads that do connect many different world religions to this idea of like, well, what is it outside of this place? Like what is it that's past this world that we exist in and that we know?
Right.
And like we're never gonna find out, like in the sense of seeing it like that, you know.
Won't report back.
But like art like gives us the ability to like, I don't know, I think that like there's value in art and communication, you know.
I love that too, that positive perspective, because I think I've had a similar conversation with other people in the past where it's like we are so interconnected and we're also so not separate and so small in the scheme of the universe, so it doesn't matter if I make art or I make music or I express myself. Like that's stupid because none of it matters. And it's like that's such a isolationist perspective, I think. Like it's so limiting, so it's really exciting to hear you talking about it in a way where that's like driving you, you know. That's cool. It's really cool.
I think I just realized, like when I was like a sophomore, I was speaking with one of my professors, Professor Ogunike, Professor O. He was like, I was reflecting on the idea of like individuality and political theory, and he taught Africana studies and teaches on like African religions and faiths and cultures. And he was saying, he's like, Carl, I think that there's like this real sort of sad norm in Western Western ideology and philosophy, where they like sort of fetishize the individual, you know. And in a lot of African like faiths and beliefs, and a lot of like Eastern faiths and beliefs, there's not the same acceptance of the individual. It's much more about community. It's about like us as unity, like unified beings together, not separated, you know. I think in like a lot of Black faith and teaching, like a lot of Black American thought, I think that that's so clear, you know. Like if you read Martin Luther King, you recognize like what he's really talking about is unity, like unity across these boundaries of ourselves, like the political boundaries that exist between us. And as we try to create things, to consider unity as sort of like an end goal too, you know, of like, how do we just see each other together? How do we bring each other together and use that to move ourselves forward, you know? And how is that something that we can reach? I think that like, you know, Frederick Douglass sort of saw the need for unification, of bringing people together. I think that like, the whole idea of using art as like a political force feels all about the idea of unity. It's like, how can I convince people to follow me or agree with me or follow this idea, this value that I have, and like allow us to move forward together? Like, it's all about communication. It's all about unity, you know? But like, if you look at Western thought that they claim is like the foundation of American history, like Rousseau and Locke and like Montesquieu, like a lot of these guys are talking about the rugged individual, like living out in a state of nature. And then honestly, it just doesn't feel worthwhile to me. Like I don't like it. I don't care about it. Like I much more feel excited by the view of like how humans can do the one thing that we've basically been doing since the jump, which is working together and living together. You know, like human beings, like the like if you think about it, even if you think about like one human being out in nature, if he finds another person, is he just gonna like continue to be alone for his whole life, or might
Probably
he?
not.
Yeah. And I mean, like, people have families. Like you come from other people. You create other people. Like, you live in community and make friends. Like, I don't know. It just feels like what life is about to me. You know.
It's interesting too. I feel like there's a reflection of that like individualist perspective in like American art history, specifically like the Western canon. Like when you think about like the big names in art history, I feel like people usually point to like Jackson Pollock, who's like a man of his time. He did it himself, like whatever, even though that's not really true, but you know, that was his rhetoric, I guess. Or like Pablo Picasso, and his art is literally about separation, like separation of shapes even, but separation of identity and fractured identity, and he's like a man on his own or whatever, which also wasn't true, but that's the story. And it's like I feel like we have so many of these titans where it's like they're just a genius, like a diamond in the rough, and nobody knows how they got there, and they're also an alcoholic. Like, there's just so much like darkness to that.
Totally.
But I feel like there's also so much, like there's other artists that have existed throughout American art history that are very much not that way. Like I feel like people don't like to talk about the politics of Frida Kahlo very much, or her focus on community or communism, but I think that that's really interesting that she's one of the most famous artists that we have, but nobody really acknowledges that very often, unless you're really getting deep into the lore of it. So, or, I mean, Andy Warhol's another good example where he, like, we know him as such a titan and so like, famous and important because of Warhol's Factory, but he gets all of the credit for that and kind of took all of the credit for that at the time. Like, I feel like America, specifically in the Western world, is so bad with that, and I think that could be, there's an interesting conversation to be had there, I guess, about the impact of capitalism on artistic expression and kind of this, like, 60s to present, like, postmodernist, contemporary modernist movement being in conjunction with the gallery circuit, that it's just so, I don't know, I could talk about that all day.
No, it's fascinating. It's really interesting to me. I mean, I guess, like, I mean, I'm somebody who makes self-portraits, so I don't know if, like, if I'm really the one to be talking about, you know, communalism versus individuality. But, like, also, like, I totally understand, like, yeah, that's a really interesting point to make, because I guess I haven't really thought too much about it from, like, how these things all connect through like the market-based system that allows people to like make art and make a living together, you know, and how that motivates people towards like creating a brand and like separating themselves from other people and like sort of like showing how they're different than others, you know, which I think is just so like, I don't know, I have a lot more fun in seeing my similarities with people than seeing the differences, you know.
I kind of wonder if it's like part of like, because the origins of Western society were patriarchs and lords and earls and all, you know, people with control and inheritance and stuff, and that isn't really the case for the regular persons just in the world. And I think that people try to create that for themselves in our society, where people are trying to make themselves the lord of something.
I'm gonna buy my mom a house.
I'm gonna buy my
Actually, no, that's kind of community oriented too, I guess.
Actually, that's a good thing to do.
I'm gonna buy a house just for me, and nobody else is allowed to live there.
Not my mom.
I'm gonna build a huge fucking wall and have a giant lawn on all sides. Nobody can come in. But
I'll buy my mom a house and me a house, but they will not be close to each other. Don't let my mom hear this.
My mom has to pay rent.
Oh, Lord. I could not say that to my mother. Hi, Mom.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
But yeah, I don't know. We went. We're at hour 37.
Wow.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, we've covered a lot. It's I always try to keep like a mental list of the topics covered so that I can make a little blurb of it later, and it's, I don't know if that's gonna be that easy.
Yeah, sorry, I won't lie. This is just kind of how my mind is every day.
I love that.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely struggle sometimes when I'm like sitting on the train and then I'm just like, are like fanatics like actually betraying themselves through this like dogmatic acceptance of their like leaders? Like literally, this was me like 2 days ago. I was like walking home and I was like, maybe I should write that down. I don't know.
You should put that somewhere.
Yeah.
I've said this to other people we've had on here, but you are the perfect type of person to be on a show like
Yeah,
this.
seriously.
I appreciate
It makes our job easy.
We've also interviewed people, and it was a bunch of fun. Regardless, we love everyone we've interviewed, but we've also had people that were the total opposite, where they do not like to talk for a long time. But
you ask someone a question, they're just like, no.
Yeah, or because the thing is just like, I find when you're doing a podcast, the people who want to be on it are always people who seek you out are people who are the type of person that would be on a podcast.
Right.
But the type of person you are seeking out, or you're like, you have this vision where you're like, oh, that person has a really interesting and unique perspective and I want to document it. That person is a coin flip of if they're the type of person that would want to be on a show.
Gosh.
So it's like those people are like are special cases where you have to like really it becomes a unique challenge.
I was so flattered when you guys asked me to do this. I was very excited. This felt like a really cool opportunity as like a new artist in Boston too. You know?
I was super excited that you said yes.
You.
You know, I was telling Brian about this the other day, but I don't know if you had heard about this success rate. But you know how the other day we were talking about the Dune movies?
Yeah.
So I think I told you that I don't know if I told you it was Carl, but we were talking about Dune. Mm-hmm. Me and Brian went home and watched both. We watched Dune and then we went to the theater and saw Dune 2, like within a few days. And so did Kelly and Helen.
Oh,
the same
really?
weekend. And we were all like, did you guys see Dune this weekend? We're like, yeah. It's like, did you talk to Carl? I was like, yeah.
I'm glad I can convince people to, no.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, thank
you.
you.
Know what I'm in.
I'm glad.
Right.
I mean, it's so funny. Like, I always think about too. Like, who tells me to go and watch certain things? Like, I only watched Dune because my friend Jason was like, "Hey, come to this movie with me. I want to go see Dune 2." And I was like, "Well, I haven't seen Dune 1."
Yeah.
And then I was like, "I guess I gotta go watch Dune 1." And then my response was like, "Dune 1 was like kind of lame. I don't know. It was like nothing good really happens. It's just kind of like ends with." Like all the bad crap happening, like okay, now I have to watch the next movie. And then Jason was like, "We don't have to go if you don't want to. If you didn't like the first one that much." I'm like, "No, I've made this commitment. We're doing this. We're not backing out now." What?
We've already invested the time. I'm in the lore.
Oh yeah. And then we took edibles and watched that movie, and it was incredible. It was incredible.
Oh man. No, when we went to see it, we accidentally got seats in the very front row of the theater. We showed up late, or like right on time, and we're just like this, watching the movie the whole time. So, yeah.
It's happened to us twice in a row.
I wish I took an edible before we did that.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You know what? You can always, like, a fun place to go if you ever want to drive. I don't know, Legacy Place. I guess you guys are down in Plymouth, right? So it's like not far.
Is the mall in Devon?
It's in Devon.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I feel like that movie theater, like, I've had really good experiences with, like, finding seats there.
Okay.
Especially, like, a matinee there is, like, pretty great. Like, most of the time, it's a pretty big movie theater, I think. So there's just, like, a good amount of space in there. And, I don't know, they got nice seats now. They didn't used to.
Nice.
Yeah.
We like to go as close to opening night as possible and buy the tickets at the last minute, right before the movie, and sit in the worst fucking seats possible.
It's so bad, dude.
We don't really do. Yeah, that's just what we always do by accident.
You know what happened? We always go with my brother. So he lives in Plymouth and we live in Rockland. So we usually go to Braintree because that's the nicest theater that's like kind of close to both of us. But 3 times in a row so far. He's not even a kid either. He's like 21. He's bought tickets to movie theaters in like Ohio by accident, just like not reading it. And he's lost like over $100. The first 2 times it was like okay, whatever.
Yeah,
the 3rd time, like we're just buying him in person.
What?
It's beyond you.
Yeah,
Is it like the same town name or something?
I don't
It
know.
must have been because
Oh
the
my
one
gosh.
time we did that, we were driving to the theater.
He was panicking.
and
And it's
Oh,
it was
no.
like 4 of us
God.
too. It was like $100.
Oh,
So,
Lord.
yeah. The first time it was like funny. He was like joking about it. He's like, well, whatever. I'll just call him for a refund. The second time he was like pretty embarrassed, but he still told us. And the third
Yeah.
time he didn't even tell us till after the movie. It was
Oh,
just like,
wow.
I don't have the tickets. Don't ask.
No.
wow, yeah.
He'd probably be so mad if he knew I was talking about this in the podcast too.
He won't ever know.
Just
Oh,
like,
man.
maybe my mom doesn't have to know that I took edibles before watching. Oh, gosh. No, that's so funny. I don't really, I guess I haven't gone to movies very much unless somebody else like prompts me to go to movies. Most
Yeah.
of the time it's my parents.
Yeah.
They like to go to like the Coolidge Corner Theater.
Oh, that
like,
one's
a lot.
fun.
Yeah.
You know what
It's a
they
lot of
have that I've been meaning to go back to? Actually, is it Brattle? Maybe it's Brattle. One of them does an open screening. So it's like an open mic, but it's for
I
filmmakers.
think that is Coolidge.
Maybe
Is it
even
Coolidge?
both. I don't know, because I think we saw a flyer at Coolidge for
You're
it
right.
recently.
You're right. I went to one before the pandemic, and it was so awesome because it's just like random local people, and some of the films are awesome. They're really cool, and some of them suck.
Yeah.
But it's like they don't even screen them. They're like, bring it, and we will screen it. And it's like 3 hours of just like 10-minute or to 5-minute shorts by people that are local. So very, very fun. Highly recommend. I wanted to go to one last month, and I don't remember why. It was a snowstorm. That wasn't last month.
You could abuse that so bad. Like, imagine if you just submitted just a film of your face not speaking
You
for
could.
like 8 minutes, just like.
You could. Yeah.
That'd be terrible. And everyone's just like, I guess we just have to sit through this.
Well, it's cool though because they're so weird.
They're just gonna be like,
Weird.
is she gonna do something? What's gonna happen? I don't know.
You gotta say something super odd in the middle too, like just 1 second of action and then
Yeah,
nothing else.
yeah, and then they're gonna sit for another 5 minutes afterward. You guys should totally watch the movies that my friends and I made in college.
Oh, hell yeah!
They're
I'd
like
love to.
they're short. They're like 10-20 minute type of things. But we did one that was called Too Much Glue. I play an orthodontist who gets involved with the mob. The head mobster is a guy named the Stapler. Yeah, and it doesn't go so well for him, it doesn't seem. And the other one was our highlight reel, where me and my friend Isaac, the other artist, we are playing two brothers who want to join the Bowdoin football team. Who sucked at the time. They had like a 15-1 record when like 15-0 record that season until like we made this video or something. It was so funny. They were very bad. And it's us wanting to join the team. The coach's name was BJ Novak. Sorry, BJ Hammer. His name's, but even still, BJ Hammer. His name's BJ Hammer. And we're like, BJ Hammer, like let us on the team. We're gonna put in so much effort, so much work. We got this. And it's like our training montage and like getting support from our mom, i.e. our friend Lily, and our coach, i.e. our friend Kenny.
That's so funny.
Yeah. I think that Too Much Glue is funnier because it was for like the 24 or like 48-hour film festival that we did.
Oh, cool.
Finn was like in charge of the festival, so he was like, I gotta make one.
Yeah.
I was gone at like a track meet the whole day, and I came home at like 8 or 9 p.m. and they're like, Carl, the minute you get here, I hope you know that you have to like get showered, get dressed, because we're gonna start filming on like a Saturday night. And so we filmed for like 3 hours before I finally got to sleep. We like drank beers in like the dining hall to like film this video. I actually, that's like one of my favorite videos I've ever made. I also made videos in high school, I guess. Those ones aren't as fun though. I mean, they're still fun, but they're not as fun. Yeah.
I made a few videos, and we made a short. Well, I don't know if short film. Short film is really generous.
Right.
It's like a 5-minute shit post, really.
Right.
But
Yeah. Good times. It's
I
called
love
The Witch.
making. Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
yeah?
The Vitch. VV.
VV. Yeah.
The
It was.
VV. The Vitch.
I don't even remember exactly what the plot was, but we filmed
wasn't
it.
really
We
a
filmed it
plot.
in like an hour, and we were making up the script as it went.
I think
that's
that-
great.
I
gotta
think you
love
were like
improv.
in the woods and you woke up and I was missing, so you run through the woods and there's action music and then you find me, but I'm tiny. And then you're like, I was like, a witch shrunk me, and you were like, what? And then there's like a cackling sound and the video ends.
Yeah, it's not.
And there's like an abuse of sound effects from YouTube.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a
We made
high
that like
art.
last year.
It wasn't exactly.
Yeah,
good
those are
times.
fun.
I want to that's one of my goals now too. Like I have a few goals, like they're my like long-term things that I'm like hoping for.
Yeah.
Like one is to learn how to make my own clothes. Another is to get back to the gym.
Yeah.
You know, very very basic thing. A third one is to get a crew so I can make movies again, because I feel like I want to keep making movies. And I think a long-term goal is for me and my boy Isaac to make like a cartoon-based television show.
Oh, cool.
Because we like really like the idea of like sketches, and like we wrote sketch
Yeah.
ideas and we made a few videos. And he's a great artist, so like I feel like he can draw some great stuff too.
Yeah.
And like I was telling my dad about a sketch idea. It was it's good for my dad. He was geeked out by it. It was like guy goes to the car wash to get his car detailed. Comes back after it's been detailed. He's like, "What the hell? What did you do to my car?" And like, we detailed it. Don't you like it? It's like, what happened to all my things? things. It's like, what do you mean your things? It's like, my things are very important things to me. What happened to my ketchup package? Like, where are the 3 stale French fries under the driver's seat?
Oh my god.
Something
real.
just like stupid like that. It's like basically an SNL sketch, but
Right. Oh, that would be awesome.
or
Oh
like
my
a
God.
guy. Isaac's favorite idea, I think, was Barry goes to Jersey Mike's and Barry wants to order the Jersey Mike's subs, so he orders like 32 subs. And it's like, why is he ordering 32 subs? You don't know why. But he's like really uncomfortable about it and like really nervous, and he's like shitting on himself. He's like, Barry, you shouldn't have done this. You know you shouldn't do this, Barry. Like, it's so stupid. Like, that kind of thing. And then he finally buys them and like runs off as fast as he can, hops in the car, throws them all into the back where you see that the whole back of the car is filled up with like Jersey Mike's subs. And then he just like, he goes, I guess back again tomorrow, and then he just drives off.
That's so good. That's even better because Jersey Mike's like sucks.
You don't like Jersey Mike's?
No, I
Oh,
don't.
that's offensive.
Is
I
that
love
controversial? Oh my gosh.
I don't know. Honestly, you know, Jersey Mike's is not that good. But I think when we were in Maine and like there were like not many sandwich options,
That's
it
fair.
really hit.
Yeah.
That's how we felt about Sheets on our last road trip. Have you ever eaten there?
No.
It's
I love Sheets though. I
it's a
don't think
gas
I would if it was
station.
here. Yeah.
But they have, you just go in and there's like they have a whole kitchen like behind the counter or whatever, and you can order just an array of things from like an iPad kiosk.
Yeah.
But it's like hot food.
And it's like, it
so
has
clutch on a
no
road trip, though.
business being as good as it
Is
is.
it?
Because it's a gas station
Yeah.
chain, and they're,
maybe it's
and it was
not even
very
good.
cheap too.
We were just like,
Yeah,
the road trip
same
that we
thing.
were on.
Where-
Probably terrible.
We went on a 10-day road trip last summer where we were sleeping in the van and just driving. We drove from here basically to Louisiana, Florida, and then back up again.
Oh, wow.
It was intense. It was a lot of driving.
Yeah, it was a triathlon.
So we were eating like mostly like Walmart snacks and like, sleeping in
And
the car.
Sheets.
So yeah, maybe it's not that good. I don't know if I want to endorse that as like a normal person right now. But like the version of me that had been sleeping in a car for like 6 days and hadn't eaten a vegetable in like a week.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Not a lot of vegetables on that trip.
So good at that time.
I remember I did this like a canoeing backpacking type of trip up in Minnesota when I was like a Boy Scout in like middle school.
Yeah.
And I remember that there was like one day that we looked into like our pack and we found that like our lunch for that day was like these like weird like cured sausages and like this like weird orange cheese that had been sitting in our bags for 4 days. And then we had like these like bars of like granola stuff with like I had like sun nut butter and jelly on them.
Yeah.
And I just remember eating them and being like, oh, this is so delicious. I'm going to eat this so much when I get home. And then getting home and trying to eat that stuff and like throwing up because it was like, well, it's just not the same. It's not the same when you're here.
It's not delicious. I was just craving nutrients.
Yeah. But I still eat like, I don't know, Little Caesars all the time.
Yeah.
I'd eat a Little Caesars pizza like, I don't know, Panda Express. Honestly,
Yeah.
Panda Express kind of hits. You can't.
That's true.
I haven't
Yeah.
eaten there much. Panda Express.
The
We went there on one of our first dates, actually. Or I did.
Really?
Well, why are you looking at me like that? Yes, we
when?
did.
Where?
Yes, we did. It was it was a drive-through on the way to the Fells in Somerville.
Are you talking about Panera?
No.
Because we went through a Panera. Well,
We
Panera
all-
doesn't have drive-throughs. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I have no idea.
You know, the Panera next to the Panda Express might have had a drive-through, though. We might have gone to Panera. Maybe we were just near a Panda Express at the time.
Does Panera have drive-throughs?
I don't know
one
if
think
Panda
does.
Express has drive-thrus. I've never seen a Panda Express.
Aren't they
but
usually in mall food courts?
I feel like
They're a food court
I
type
don't
deal?
even know. You know what though? A good reason to go to the Legacy Place movie theater is that you can get Popeyes and Panda Express both on the same day.
That's pretty good.
One before
Yeah.
the movie, one after, just like me and Jason did.
Lunch and dinner.
Yeah, my mom would be like disgusted. But she like would totally shame me for that one. It was so funny.
Popeyes does hit though.
Ugh.
Something. Not if you eat it too many times in a row. Like one time I had it like 2 or 3 times in 1 week or something, and it was like, I think I felt like I was actually a corpse.
Oh wow!
Like just
Yeah.
reanimated.
No,
to
totally. I worked at the there's that Amazon warehouse down in Randolph. I had that that Popeyes that's nearby it like multiple days in 1 week, and I was like, oh.
Like, oh my god.
Like there's just like like sludge going through your
Yeah,
veins.
dude.
And no nutrients.
I used to work at a job where the only place that was close enough to me on my lunch break that I could get food at fast enough during my lunch break was a McDonald's. And every single day I was like, I'm gonna make food when I get home from work, and I'm gonna bring it for tomorrow. And every single day I would eat chicken nuggets and just like want to die.
That's me here.
So yeah, seriously.
I still get chicken fingers here too many days. Gosh.
Oh man.
Well, it's great getting to talk with you guys.
Of
Yeah,
course.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. This is
Yeah,
awesome.
we haven't
appreciate it.
we haven't done a 2-hour episode in a while.
Oh, wow.
And this is just about 2. So
Nice.
Sometimes it just happens like that.
Yup.
That's sick.
Hell yeah.
Love that. Also, okay, I feel like I brought this up before. I don't know. Y'all seem like you might be Dungeons and Dragons people, not to assume or presume. But
You know what? We're
love
very
that.
adjacent. I've never really done a campaign, but every single one of my friends and my siblings play it.
Really?
Or
You know
did
when
at
we
a
talked
time.
about this?
Yeah.
We did talk about this.
Yeah.
It was after we went to the Nutcracker, though.
Oh, yeah?
So,
oh.
yeah. I wasn't fully checked in anymore at
Yeah,
that point in the night.
Yeah, me either. I also was talking to like Kelly about it like a week or two ago. I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like I was like, Kelly, can we like do one?
She
Like,
agreed to be a dungeon master.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's one of those things that's going to be so much effort to get off the
Ah.
ground that I think we have to like really make it happen. But I think we could.
Could we do it like a day and like try it out? I don't know.
I don't think you could.
What's the optimal
No.
like? Is it because I used to have friends that would do it like once a week or every 2 weeks or something? What do people? What is like a once a month, and you go for like 2 or 3 hours or
See,
something?
the thing is, I feel like if
Or
it's
is it
once
like-
a month, you just don't stick with it.
Really?
Okay.
It's like
Here's my idea. Okay.
once a week's a lot, though.
We do it maybe once or twice a month during
Yeah.
the summer on Friday afternoons.
Perfect. Yeah.
Because we're all gonna be. I mean, I guess. Then again,
maybe
it's like,
Thursday.
Yeah,
night.
Thursday, because that's when we're actually there. We're like here, because no one comes in on a Friday anyway. But then again, who's gonna even be around in the summer? Never mind. I don't know. But like, I feel like I've been watching people like play it online, like literally
Yeah.
like listening to campaigns and being like, why does this sound fun? But I don't really know how this works.
Well, it's so complicated, but if you know one person who knows the rules, it's not that hard. Because only the
Okay.
dungeon master really needs to know the rules.
Okay.
But I've played it before, but it was like a dumbed down version. I think I told you about this. We have Brian, I don't know if I told you this, but we have a mutual friend. It's so strange, a strange connection. But a parent of a friend that I had
Oh, yeah.
in high school,
Yeah, I remember this now.
the one that I used to play D&D with when I was in high school all the time, their parents had a campaign that they had started in college when they were first dating that continued. They just didn't stop it. And they had a bunch of characters that would cycle in and out that they would give to people that wanted to join.
Wow.
And they had kids. And then I was friends with one of their kids. And I was a temporary character in that game. But it wasn't really the rules of D&D because it was so deep in and nobody understood it. We were like 14. So they would just be like, this happened, what do you do? And then we do it, and they'd be like, they do like the D&D math or whatever, and they'd be like, it didn't work. And we'd be like, okay, and then make something else up. So I didn't understand any of the process, but I was in the game. And that parent was also a Boy Scout leader for Carl.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was like the scouting executive for like the Spirit of Adventure Council.
Oh my lord.
And
Yeah.
that meant that he was like in charge of like the camps for the council, including the camp I worked at as a high schooler.
Yeah.
And so, she at the time was Chuck Eaton, who was the boss of my other boss, Chuck Blanchett. So there were two Chucks. I had two boss Chucks. It was really funny. It was Chuck and there was Big Chuck.
Right. Do you think with a campaign that long that they've kept track of everything that's ever happened in it? Or do you think things have happened in that campaign that they don't even remember?
So the thing is, to my understanding, you could conceivably conclude a storyline and then continue with the characters. Because I think they had friends that they started
Right.
with that had characters, but
Oh, wow.
the way you play is it's like mission oriented. Like I was in one that we did all of the world building, all the character building, but then we never actually played. But I was learning about it where the Dungeon Master wrote a game where basically we were trying to get into a castle, and whenever people went into this castle, this like abandoned town or whatever, a lot of people would just die and not come back out again, and nobody knew why. So the mission was that all of our characters that had different backgrounds, different skill sets, would go into this castle not knowing each other. They were like assembled by the government to go in and infiltrate, and based on our background and the skills and stats that we'd chosen separately, then the dungeon master would be able to calculate whether or not things we wanted to do would work. So what you do is for like a week before the game, you pick your stats, you pick your class, you pick your background, Don't look at me like that. It's really cool.
I believe you. I'm not looking at you like anything.
But, like, for example, you'd make backstory, like, I'm an orphan, and I'm orphaned because this thing happened, which is a political thing that happened, like, 30 years ago in universe, and this person is affected by it, but their character doesn't know that because the Dungeon Master is going to tell them later in the game.
Oh, wow.
And, like, they uncover it because of something they found in the castle. So, theoretically, long story short, you could do this objective, go back to the town, and then some characters could drop off, and you could take more characters and do something else. So you really only need... I guess you really only need to keep playing. You could keep going, I guess. But, yeah. And somehow you roll dice, too.
You roll some dice.
The dice are part of it.
Right.
But I think it sounds sick.
I'm imagining like a game where it's like a bunch of people who are all part of like one restaurant's like wait staff.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
But the restaurant like travels through the universe or something, kind of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy type vibes. I
love that.
And so like they end up in different places, and like every so often, like maybe like a way to get people in and out would be like, oh, you know, so and so's going off to college, so and so got a new job, so and so got, you know, brought up to manager, so like going off to regional or whatever.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Wow.
I feel like
that's a good concept.
Yeah.
I played Munchkin. I don't know if you guys know Munchkin at all.
I've heard of it, no.
It's like a parody of Dungeons and Dragons. It's like a card-based game where like all the cards have like some of them have like weapons on them, and some of them have like monsters. And so the idea is that it's like 2 decks, and you like pull cards from one deck that are door cards. So you're like opening the door to the dungeon. And so it might be like a monster you have to fight, or like a curse that applies to you, or like just an item that you get to hold on to, right? And every turn starts with like one of those, and then if you like fight a monster and kill it, then you get to take treasures, which are from the other deck. And so you're like a munchkin. It's like a level 1 munchkin. Your goal is to get to level 10 by killing like either killing 10 monsters or going up levels by selling items.
Oh, cool.
Is that type of idea. And there's like the base game that you can buy. There's a bunch of expansion packs and like other game sets that they have. When I was in college, my teammates, my senior year, like the throw squad, this was like the biggest. They're like this is one of the reasons I love those boys so much, is that like I was like, I want to make my own game. Like, would you guys help me do it? And they were all into it because like I had played Munchkin with a few of them once, and they were all really into it. So we made like a Bowden / throwing like track and field themed game. So you could be like a thrower, a jumper, a runner, or I think it was like thrower, jumper, runner essentially. And like you could be a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And then like we made the monsters things / people that we knew. Like this one kid who we did track against, who like we all hated because he was just like way better than us for no reason and kind of a jerk about it sometimes, but like we made him one of the bad guys, like one of the monsters in the game. And it was funny because his card was he was like level like 20, like really hard to fight, and everybody has to work together because if one person loses, everybody loses and goes down a level.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So it's like if he beats you, then he beats everyone, you know. So everybody's got to work together type of vibes.
That's funny.
Yeah, because it's kind of like us putting him in the game and being like, we don't want anyone to actually have to lose against him. But they like literally sat with me for hours and helped me craft this game.
Yeah.
Like what a kind gesture of these people to me for them to do that. Hello. How's it going? Like what a sweet gesture. Like that they had no reason to do that with me at all.
They're like, I'm in.
Yeah, they were like, Carl, let's do it, you know? And some of them came up with their own ideas. We like drew little images on a lot of the cards. We came up with like random things. It was like one of the monsters was like old line judge. So like the idea was like, oh, it's like somebody who's the like official at a track meet who doesn't actually know how to like look at the line, and so every time you like are fine, they think you're stepping over it, and they just like call you a foul or something.
Oh, the old line.
Like
That's funny.
yeah. So like I don't know, it's a Dungeons and Dragons like parody game is sort of how I've sort of seen it, because you're going into a dungeon and you're like busting down the door and fighting a monster.
Yeah.
But it's turn based, so it's like very quick and it's doesn't take a lot of explaining. It's very
Yeah, that seems a little more my speed, I think.
yeah.
I think if I played a whole campaign of D&D the right way and understood it by watching someone, I could do it, but I cannot read the books. Like, there's literally tomes of rules. It's like,
That's
I
what I don't
can't.
understand. I'm like, so
Like, are
you
we all
got-
doing the reading?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would do it once to get into it.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know. It just sounds. I just want I want people to play games with, and I only have one roommate. Excuse me, and it's my brother.
Yeah.
And I don't really know if he plays any kind of card games or turn-based games or anything like that.
I love games like that.
It'd be super fun.
I feel like it's very rare that I can talk people into doing it. The only other person who is down for card games or board games is your brother, Liam.
It's my brother, yeah.
Yeah.
He likes board games.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I'll be hanging out at the house and he'll be like, do you guys want to play a board game? And I'll say yes, and nobody else will say anything, and then we'll just be like, please, guys, just play a board game.
That's huge. That's sick.
It is fun.
Gosh.
Well, shit, I guess we'll continue this conversation, I guess, on the way out, but...
Yeah, I literally have to finish something at my desk.
I have to get my
Oh, you
backpack.
do, for real?
Yeah.
Oh, God, you guys can't even leave yet.
Yeah,
What time does this place close?
10 o'clock.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just today and tomorrow, right?
Yeah, Thursdays and Fridays.
Maybe I'll go see some art on the way out or something.
We have
Yeah.
different cars, too.
I
My
have
car's
a
in
long ride
valet.
home. I gotta go out and get on a bus or either a
Oh,
train
no.
and then a train and then a bus, or a bus and then a train and then a bus.
Oh my god, we shouldn't
But
keep you then. I
it's-
didn't
yeah,
even...
It's it's all right. It's all right. I decided I want to stay out because it's a Thursday night.
Hell
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just
hell
gonna
yeah.
go and smoke some weed and go to bed.
Fuck yeah,
That's
great.
my-
Well, yeah. Thank you for blessing our show with your perspective and
Yeah.
for joining our
Yeah.
catalog of
Thank you
cool
for
people.
having me. I'd love to come
Of
and like
course.
chat again, or like
Yeah,
honestly,
we'll do
like
something.
I also like for real have been like really admiring y'all's like Instagram presence because
Oh, cool.
I'm like, oh
Thank
no,
you.
like both of them have like this really cool like mentality towards art, and like I've talked about y'all with other people because
Oh,
I'm like,
shit,
oh, these
that's
people
awesome.
are like sick. You should follow them.
Thank you so much.
So
It was so
good.
awesome
Thank
to
you.
hear.
Yeah, it's very cool. Also, I'm just gonna say, like, it seems like every time I see any art things on the internet,
Yeah.
you already follow them.
I try.
Yeah, like Gallery 263. I was like, I just found that place, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
Theo already follows them. Okay.
I think of Instagram as like part of my job. Like, I'm just
valuable.
always on there.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
Gosh.
I guess we'll shut these things off now.
Nice.
Hell yeah, Boston Art Podcast.
Hey.
Yeah.